We're about to start on the next table game, so the questions should be coming out now. I'd like to point out, as a reference, two little things about my background which will explain what we're going to do. I'm a medievalist by training. My brother and sister are both scientists. And so whenever we used to talk to each other at college, they would be saying, well, this is the right answer and that's the wrong answer. And I would just say, I'm an artist. There's no such thing as a right answer. And in fact, when I was hanging out with the philosophers, we would be debating, well, is there any such thing as an answer at all? So for the table game, this is not like a geolocation exercise. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. What I'm going to try and do is to get you to think about the process of what we do day by day, and so you can practice that thought pattern yourself, so when you need it, we're there. The second thing is that once I stopped being a medievalist, I became a scuba diving instructor, because sitting in a climate-controlled library all the time is a little wearing. One of the things they taught me as a scuba diving instructor is that any rule you learn, you've got to be able to remember underwater and in the dark. If you can't remember it at that point, there's no point learning it at all. And if you think about the information environment we are in right now, trust me on this, when you start reading Russian disinformation, you will feel like you are drowning in the dark. It's a flood, and it sweeps you away. It's very like being a diver in Scottish waters, in fact. So what we need, and what I need on a daily basis, is a really simple set of rules which I can remember. I was a press officer at NATO for 3.5 years dealing with Russian disinformation. There was a lot of Russian disinformation between 2011 and 2014. And on a regular basis, me and my colleagues would see something that was being said by Vladimir Putin or by Sergei Lavrov, and we'd think, oh, God, that is so predictable. Time and again, we would end up clasping our heads and think, that is really predictable. And so I thought, well, yeah, it is predictable, so why aren't we able to predict it? And so I tried to come up with a predictive model that will allow us to say, with reasonable certainty, if NATO does X, then Russia will do Y. Or if NATO does A and B, Russia will do C and D. And what I came up with was not just C and D, but what I think of as the 4D approach. Now, this is not something you will find written down in Russian doctrine. This is something which I have derived from being bombarded by Russian disinformation far too often. Since I came up with this model, people have suggested that perhaps the same model applies to other actors. So I will be talking you through a few Russian examples. One of the table games is an example of a trolling by the alt-right, so you can certainly see there's a connection there. Some people have suggested that some other Western politicians might use the same pattern. It's entirely up to you whether you feel like applying the 4Ds in that environment as well. The 4Ds start with dismiss. If you can't answer your critics, you insult them. You call them Russophobes. You call them fake news. You call the white helmets in Syria Al-Qaeda terrorists. You call Bellingcat fakes. It's all about insulting the witness rather than actually dealing with the fact. It's the simplest and the most frequent way with which disinformation actors will try and target people who come out with evidence. So the first D is dismiss. What we're going to do, incidentally, I will talk you through the 4Ds, and then in the table game, you will practice spotting the 4Ds in just a couple of happy little statements from a couple of happy little actors in the disinformation world. Okay? So you might want to write down what the 4Ds are. I can always remind you if necessary. So the first one is dismiss. If you can't answer your critics, you just insult them. The second one is distort. If you don't like the facts, you twist them. And one of my favorite examples of this is, at the start of this year, the United States deployed 87 tanks to Europe. Having moved all their tanks out of Europe in 2014, they deployed 87 tanks back. Now, 87 tanks, there's quite a lot of firepower, but for a country the size of Russia, it's not what you might call a terrifying invasion force. 87 tanks, yeah? And so this is probably why one particular English language website in the Donbass ran the headline, US deploys 3,600 tanks to Europe. I'm not making this up. You can find this online. 3,600. They went from 87 tanks to 3,600. Because, let's face it, 87 tanks is not a credible invasion force. That's not going to scare anybody. If you want to scare somebody with a headline, just make the numbers bigger. So the second D is dismiss. If you don't like the facts, you twist them. And again, there are plenty of examples. The third one is distract. Bit hard to tell what that photo is in the background. In fact, it's a B-52 bomber dropping bombs over Vietnam. The reason I put that in there is because of the number of times I have had Russian trolls tweeting to me on Twitter when we've been reporting on the breaking of Aleppo. Well, so what about what we did in Syria? You bombed Vietnam. Personally, I would like to go on the record and saying, I did not bomb Vietnam. I was not born at that point. But it's the classic distraction technique, and the point is not to draw a moral parallel between something that happened 50 years ago and something that happened now. It's purely to change the subject. This is what they used to call whataboutism. Well, so what if we annexed Crimea, you annexed Kosovo? It's like, I don't remember Kosovo becoming the 51st state of the United States. The whole point of the distraction technique is just to accuse the accuser of the same thing, so you put them on the rhetorical defensive. And the last of the 4 Ds is dismay. If the other side proposes something, make it look scary. The reason that you have a picture of a mushroom cloud in the background, is there anybody from Denmark here? Any Danes? We've got a Swede here, that's practically the same. It was the same country for a few hundred years, same kingdom anyway. So Denmark was discussing a couple of years back whether they would contribute a single radar frigate to NATO's missile defense system. One frigate, yeah? Not hugely terrifying. The Russian ambassador to Denmark gave an interview to Jyllands-Posten, one of the main outlets in Denmark, saying, well, of course, if you do that, we'll have to put you on the nuclear strike list. This was said while the Danish parliament was debating whether they were going to do this or not. That's a dismaying tactic. That gets quoted in Parliament as saying, yeah, but you know what? If we do this, we're going to get hit by nukes. We think of the phrase going nuclear as a rhetorical device which is going really, really over the top. Russian rhetoric does go nuclear. In the same way, recently, Norway was discussing deploying 300 US Marines, 300, lots of scary US Marines, to Norway for a long-term rotational presence. And again, a senior Russian member of the Duma said, well, if they do that, we're going to have to put them on the nuclear strike list. In a sense, it must be quite flattering for the US Marines to think that 300 of them are so terrifying that Russia thinks of going nuclear. But again, the whole point is to get inside the head of the political debate and scare people. My God, that's so terrifying. Maybe we shouldn't do it. Maybe we shouldn't let the Marines come here at all. So, dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay are the 4 Ds, and you can, and I have, sit through long and tedious Russian speeches, and you can play bingo with the 4 Ds. You can see if you can find all 4 Ds in a single speech. It's actually quite difficult, largely because the 4th D, dismay, kind of sits off to one side from the others. You will regularly find dismiss, distort, and distract all in the same speech, sometimes all in the same sentence. The dismaying tactic sits off a bit to one side. It's a bit less subtle as a rhetorical device. But I've sat through Putin's speeches and ticked them off. I've sat through Gerasimov's speeches and done the same thing. So you are now going to do the same. You should have on your tables 3 pieces of paper, okay? One is a printout from the Russian Foreign Ministry, a recent statement on the Times article, Putin's Propaganda. The second one is a quote from Maria Zakharova, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, on Bellingcat, which I humbly dedicate to the entire Bellingcat team who are here, and I hope they will particularly enjoy this one. And then the third one is, sorry, it's slightly small font, but that is a collection of screenshots of tweets that were sent to me after I exposed one particular alt-right account in the US as a repetitive cyborg. Start with the one on the Times, then look at the one on Zakharova, and if we have time, we can look a bit at the tweets as well. I put the tweets in partly to show it's not just the Russians who do this. But in each one, as a table group, discuss, going through these speeches, what do you think are cases of dismiss, distort, distract. See if you can find any ones of dismay. If they're not in there, dismay, like I said, sits off to one side. Take some time over that, and then we will discuss what you find. Remember, I am a medievalist, I am an artist. There is no such thing as a right answer, and there are some sentences in these statements which actually tick multiple boxes at the same time. So if you think, well, is it dismiss or is it distort, it could well be both. But what we'll do is then we'll discuss it. Hopefully we'll have time for questions, and we can actually back and forth what you think of this and what can be done about it. Okay? So take a few minutes now, go through them together as a table team, and see which techniques you can find. Okay. Oh, and the ceiling fell in. How are we doing? Everybody got something? Okay. Donara, Nika, have we got the microphones? So what we'll do, as I said, there's no such thing as a right answer in the world of medievalism. Most of the answers are 800 years old anyway. What we'll do is, rather than saying, here is a list of correct answers, here is a list of incorrect answers, I'll just go around some of the tables, and I will ask somebody on each table just to give one example from one of the things of one of the Ds that you have found, and then we can discuss a little bit the background of it, and you can throw lots of questions at me, and I can find clever ways of evading them, because I used to be a press officer. So I see there's a mic over here. Do you want to come out with a D that you have found?
Hi, Venslav from Serbia. Okay, what we found here is a little bit differs from my colleague. I found insult, she found dismiss. In Maria Zakharova, it says, we took note of an interview with Bellingcat representatives for the BBC in which they sarcastically spoke about some trolling on the part of Ministry of Defense and Foreign Ministry of Russia for allegedly attacking them. Well, what I found, the word sarcastically, I found it as insult.
Yeah.
And my colleague, she found these words as dismiss.
Very good. And in fact, that's a particularly nice one. I mean, absolutely right. Why is a foreign ministry, of all people, accusing somebody else of being sarcastic? It serves no factual function at all. What it's doing is trying to dismiss them from the word go. It's also a case of distraction. If you think distraction is when you're accused of something, you accuse somebody else of the same thing, you will probably not find a more sarcastic spokesperson in the world than Maria Zakharova. It's one of her main ways of attacking people is to be sarcastic herself. So that in that one word, you've got both an attempt to dismiss and you've also got a distraction technique. So that's a very nice one. We will go to one of the tables over here, table on my left. If we can have a mic there, and you can tell us one of the Ds that you found. Yeah, volunteers?
Yeah, I'll do. So this is some sort of reaction to a Times article from the UK, and it says, "We cannot rule out the editors of the Times were moved by professional jealousy when they decided to slander Russia Today and Sputnik." So that looks like sort of a bit of insulting there, so maybe dismissing the Times article.
Absolutely right. And something you'll find, particularly with the Russian propaganda, is that dismiss is the most common technique that they use. And again, this is an official statement from a foreign ministry. You do need to wonder about the tone. Not only they're accusing a major international newspaper of slander, but they are also saying, oh, it's professional jealousy. I mean, there's a real degradation of the concept of being diplomatic on this one. But no, that's absolutely right. That is a clear-cut case of dismissing. We'll go back to this side. Table at the back.
We have Dismay at the embassy one. This case is not just an information campaign. It involves human lives, the destinies of the victims' families who definitely want to know the truth.
In what way is that dismay?
Because they're just blaming then that it's a misinformation campaign.
Yeah, I see your point. I would see that more one as, again, a combination of dismissing and distracting. You know, if you and actually, to be honest, that is a case of sheer callous cynicism. If you think all the actual evidence points to the fact that Russia provided the weapon which shot down MH17 and killed 298 people flying over the country, then for the spokesperson to say, yes, you've got to remember it involves human lives, and trying to blame Russia for it is an information campaign, that's pretty cheeky. A dismaying comment would be more, because of doing this, something bad will happen. So the way the dismaying technique tends to work is that if you send one press officer to join NATO, we will put you on the nuclear strike list. That's more the way the dismaying technique works. So it's much more about saying, if this, then this. If you do something, then something really, really bad will happen to you. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's go volunteers on this side, or if not volunteers, then nominees. Yep.
So I think we found a dismay in the tweet.
Aha.
The tweets are pretty violent. So
yes, it was a fun day when I was getting those.
So there's this nice tweet from Deplorable Schmuck that says, this guy tweets the truth and it pisses people off. After we drain the swamp, we'll flush the toilet. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and one of the things I didn't put in there is that when they started working out what my address was and posting threats about that. So this is not just a Russian thing. You know, dismay is a real technique which they will use to try and shut you up. The nice thing when you do my kind of job and you have my kind of software is that when they send you 960 tweets like this in the space of 2 hours, you run the software on it. And then you have the entire list of everybody who's attacking you, and you can actually look at the patterns. So if anybody ever gets trolled, then send me a message and I'll run the software on it. Because we love data. We love being trolled because it actually identifies who the trolls are and how they work together. There's another very interesting little sidelight on this one particularly. You'll see references in the tweets to an account called WDFX2EU10. This is an extremely nasty US-based troll who is normally known as Microchip. The reason I can recite his address like that is because when he started off, his address was WDFX2EU. And then that got blocked by Twitter and he set up WDFX2EU1, which got blocked by Twitter and he set up WDFX2EU2, and so on. And what I did after about 5 iterations of this, I just screen grabbed each of his identities in turn. I just posted a tweet saying, you know, here's a serial troll that Twitter haven't identified. The next day, his account, WDFX2EU9, was blocked by Twitter. So he stood up WDFX2EU10 and he triggered this major bot attack on me, this troll attack on me. I got 960 offensive tweets in a couple of hours. So it was heavy while it lasted. And then he disappeared. And the next time he turned up again, he was WDFX2EU16. So 5 of his accounts in a row had been taken offline. And I still treasure a tweet from his number 11 account, which said, "This is weird, I've been online for 3 minutes and I've already been warned by Twitter." So if you report this stuff, you can actually have an effect. And even more tellingly, when his number 10 account is full of, "Come at me, Benny Mo, there's nothing you can do about me." His number 16 account started off, "Benny Mo, follow me so I can direct message you." And I thought, why in God's name would I follow this guy so he can DM me? And about a couple of hours later, I got, Benimo, follow me, or else. And later on, it was, Benimo, follow me, or face dire consequences. And actually, the best thing you can do to trolls like this, don't block them. You can mute them if you like, but just ignore them. The fact that I was just not doing my normal tweeting and carrying on, and this guy was somewhere in the US, getting his accounts shut down, sending me offensive tweets, and I didn't even reply. So particularly when you're dealing with trolls, the most powerful thing you can do is think, you know what? You are not worth spending time on. Because it really, really does work. Even with people who can trigger Twitter storms like this, it's worth doing. Which side are we on? Okay.
So it's a bit of a grey one, but it would be helpful to sort of unpick to an extent. So going back to the Times rejection, it's the third paragraph. We assume the UK media circles are aware of the British media regulator Ofcom's check of Russia Today. We weren't sure on this table whether Ofcom had actually conducted that check or whether that was the conclusion that they came to. But maybe that's part of the whole thing, and we're victims of this disinformation.
Bingo. That's absolutely right. That is a distortion attempt. And in fact, I'm working on an article on this one right now. In a nutshell, Ofcom is the UK telecoms regulator. One of its jobs is to enforce laws of broadcast journalism and standards. And the standard for Ofcom is that, and I quote, news must be reported with due accuracy and presented with due impartiality. RT has had 14 violations by Ofcom recorded in the UK since it was set up in 2005. Over the last 2.5 years, it's had 8 different programs found guilty of violations. So to claim that Ofcom has checked out RT and given them a clean bill of health is a distortion. What has happened is in the last few months, a number of people have launched complaints against RT for specific programs. And Ofcom has looked at those specific programs and said, we did not find a violation in that specific program. But we're talking a single broadcast of like 10 minutes. So this is very much a case of distortion. The other thing is that the way Ofcom works, it is only mandated to assess broadcasters who use the airwaves. So they can look at radio and TV. Ofcom has no remit over internet-only productions. So given that Sputnik is an internet-only production, to say that Ofcom has checked out Sputnik must of necessity be a lie. There is no way that Ofcom can check Sputnik because Sputnik is internet only. So that is a case where it's definitely distortion. That's the kind of thing where you need to be a geek like me. I read Ofcom obsessively because they're great. They really nail RT. So that's the kind of one where if you suspect that there is distortion, you need to do a little bit of reading into it. But that's right. That's the case of distortion. Here, great stuff. People behind the lights.
Okay, I would like to continue with the same article and the same paragraph, which says, meanwhile, the Times has regularly caught spreading fake news, so this might be a case of distraction. So rather than acknowledging that problem is with them, they are trying to say that those who are saying bad things about us, they do the same thing or even do worse things.
Absolutely right, and that's the classic use of the distraction technique. We're accused of fake news, so we're going to accuse you of fake news as well. And again, the point is not to start a moral equivalency. The point is just to get everyone to think, well, let's look at the Times and their fake news record. The correct response to this is to say, no, we're not talking about the Times here. We're talking about RT and Sputnik and the way they behave. And the fact that, for example, they have been found guilty by Ofcom of violating the standards 14 times since they were set up, which I think is a record. So when you're dealing with the distraction technique, the crucial thing is not to be distracted. You can just turn around and say, okay, we can talk about the Times at another date, but what we're talking about right now is RT and Sputnik and the way they behave. Okay, so we've got one here.
So we're looking at the Embassy of the Russian Federation press release, and there's obviously a very clear dismissal right at the start, where it says Foreign Ministry spokesperson claims that Bellingcat is an instrument to divert attention from investigating the tragedy. I mean, they give no particular reason why they can't comment or even investigate So obviously a clear dismissal.
That's right. But again on that one, you're spot on. It's a dismissal. Do we think that's also a distraction technique? What is this whole statement trying to do? Yes, it's trying to dismiss Bellingcat, but it's also trying to turn attention away from the fact that Russia provided the missile which shot down MH17. What's one of the things you do? Yeah, we're trying to distract you, so we'll accuse you of trying to distract attention from what actually happened. And you get into this spin with distraction. It goes into ever-decreasing circles of, I'm going to accuse you of what you're accusing me of, and then it just degenerates. And the level of lies that come through get deeper and deeper and deeper. So like I said, this is an art form rather than a science. So you can absolutely have dismissal and distraction in the same sentence because it's serving two purposes. It's effectively saying there's no point listening to Bellingcat because they're all liars, and also incidentally they're trying to distract you from the evil things that the Ukrainians and the CIA and Mossad and God only knows who else all did when they shot down MH17 at the same time. Yeah. Okay, so how much time have we got?
1 minute.
One more minute? Okay, have we got one more? Volunteers? Eager hand shoots up there.
On tweets again.
Mm-hmm.
I think dismiss technique is the most common in tweets and Facebook comments.
Yep.
Some brain to do distraction and the other techniques.
Yeah.
And in one tweet I found dismiss, distract, and distort technique.
Oh, brilliant. Do tell.
It's the one, yes, I agree, Ben is bad. Turkey keeps winning the game while playing with Ben's rules.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That was a particularly surreal one, and I actually ended up looking at that account and thinking, where did Turkey come into this? But it's a very, very bizarre tweet. And you do get this. Sometimes you're looking at it and thinking, okay, either they're insane or I am, and I'm pretty certain it's not me. So absolutely right. The reason we've done this exercise is really both to teach you what the 4Ds are, and so that you remember when you are underwater in the dark, you can still remember them. To be honest, the other thing I would be delighted to see would be to see more people start using this. 4D bingo is a real game. You really can play it. And in terms of winding up the disinformation actors, it's one of the best things you can do because they hate it. For a while, a couple of years back, I used to run a campaign on Twitter just called D of the Day. And each day I would pick out one Russian statement and say, today this gets my vote for distraction or distortion or dismissal. The more people use this, both you can entertain each other when you're sitting through a really, really tedious press conference, but it's also identifying the factors and the tools which the disinformation actors work. And the more we can all do that, the more we can teach more people. When you're listening to a press conference, when you're reading a statement, this is the kind of thing you can do, and this is what you can identify. So the point of the 4Ds is really to be able to predict and expose the techniques that are being used. Because once you're focusing on the techniques, it's much harder for people to use them back at you.